What was the most intense experience of your life? Spending 3 days in palliative care with almost all my family watching my dad slowly die. We laughed and told stories all while he lay there sleeping. There was so much love and compassion in that room that when he finally did slip away, it was as sad that we were losing the chance to spend time together in that tiny cramped room. I'll never forget watching his body die, but I also won't ever forget sitting on the floor in the room eating sandwiches and stealing a little bit from a flask of vodka that someone had brought to put in my Coke just to take the edge off. Every night you would hear the cries from other rooms as another family said goodbye, only to be replaced by someone else the next day. A race to a finish line no one wanted to win. Meningitis. Pain so intense you have a moment of panic just before each heartbeat because you know how bad your head will hurt during it. Only time I've experienced fever hallucinations. Eyes open I was in the hospital. Eyes closed I was somewhere else. Other times eyes closed I could still see the hospital room, but there was a girl with short hair sitting in a chair watching me. They didn't want to give me a Foley bag for whatever reason, so every time I went to the bathroom, which was a lot with the IV, I would spend the next 5 minutes dry heaving into a cardboard bowl, which in turn did wonders for the headache. When I could finally eat again after 6 days, that hospital turkey sandwich was the most delicious thing. Nurses later told my wife they didn't think I was going to make it through first night. Good times. I worked as an EMT at an amusement park. I have hundreds of these kind of stories, but the one that sticks out the most is when a pregnant female miscarried in one of the restrooms. That was without a doubt the worst call I have ever been on. The look on her face is not something I will ever forget. First, a little backstory. I have spinal muscular atrophy, SMA, a genetic disease that slowly wastes away your motor neurons. I have never walked and use a wheelchair to get around. About a year ago, the first ever treatment for SMA, Spinraza, was fast-tracked by the FDA out of the trial phase and made available to the public. The most intense experience of my life has to be laying on a hospital bed, receiving my first dose of the drug and feeling a deep sense of hope for the first time in a very long time. I spent some time cleaning up bodies, kinda like sunshine cleaners. There was this one house. Going into the house smelled unusually normal and there wasn't signs of decay anywhere, which was unusual. Then we got to the bedroom. The guy had used plastic sheets to wall off his whole room so when he killed himself it wouldn't affect the house. It got worse from there cause he tried to use a towel to keep the gunshot contained and it basically made it into a cannon. The plastic was sealed pretty well so I was able to suit up and get my mask on before going in. Even without the smell, the first sight after pulling back the plastic was the most intense experience I think I will ever have. At my lowest point, my only reason for not killing myself was I don't want someone to have to clean me up. My heart goes out to that guy. Finding out that I had unknowingly been friends with my birth father for years. Retrieving my friend's personal belongings from the car he died in. It was summer, and everything was absolutely soaked in his blood. We'd been friends since childhood, and the remaining members of our group of friends, including his sister, sat in numb silence as we drove the hour-long trip back with the few everyday items we'd managed to retrieve. We left most of it there. My partner works at an auto body shop scrapyard and he told me that kind of thing is always the worst. Even if the car is completely destroyed, they have to tow it to the lot and then try to pull any personal belongings out of the vehicle for the family to pick up. They can't really clean anything, so it's in a situation. Counter-terrorist operation in Tbilisi, Georgia a few weeks ago happened in the building where I live. 16 hours of random explosions and gunshots while waiting to be evacuated from the building. 3 years ago I was bitten and envenomated by a king brown on a remote site. I had effects from the venom but worse effects from the anti-venom, including temporary blindness. It took 2 years for my organs and muscles to recover. You are lucky. I had to do a coronial investigation for a fellow who was bitten by one. Please repeat after me. If I am bitten by a snake, I will go to the hospital, not go and get another carton of emu export to drink. Had my tonsils out when I was a kid. Was living with my dad at the time, but one particular night a couple days after, I really wanted to take a bath, and my mom had a big tub, So I went one night to stay with her for a few days. The next morning, my throat started bleeding heavily. Well, my stepdad worked second shift, so he was home and drove me to the hospital. Wound up serving a vein before I got there. Was violently vomiting blood. They had to stick a hot iron down my throat to stop the blood. Lost 4 pints total. Had 3 transfusions. Said if I was at my dad's and home alone, I probably wouldn't have made it. Was less than awesome. I got a call from a school friend at 2 AM once after he had his tonsils out. His roommates were all drunk and he knew I didn't really drink and needed a lift to the hospital. I remember going inside to get him and seeing the bathroom covered in blood from him swallowing and then throwing up blood all over the place. Very scary. Drove him straight to the hospital and all was fine. Very scary. When I was in 3rd grade, my family lived on the 2nd floor of an apartment complex. My sister was 10 years older than me and she and I used to roughhouse a lot. She was bigger and stronger than me and I was a very scrawny kid, but I loved fighting with her. It was fun. So, one day we were fighting and I decided to use my super secret finishing move, the running headbutt. So, I bent over and charged her like a baby bull. She stopped me, gabbed me and threw me behind her. She totally forgot that the only thing behind her was the window. I broke the window and nearly fell out, except that my sister caught me. I remember hanging from the window with nothing except my sister standing in between me and a very painful fall. She managed to pull me back up, and despite the fact that I broke the window and that I was supposedly on top of shard of glass, I did not have a single injury on me. Not a cut. Nothing. It was intense. She was so sorry that she made me some popcorn, got me a soda, and we sat down and watched Brother Bear. First time we saw it together. One of my classmates was outside when it happened and she told my other classmates how I was screaming my head off during the incident. Fun day. I love kids. Sorry I almost killed you. Here's some popcorn. Other kid. Sweet. Totally makes up for it. Having a doctor who assumed someone had spoken to me about it have a glance at my chart when I was in the hospital for low red blood counts and say to me, well, you have cancer, so that's probably why. No one had said anything to me about cancer. Everyone kept telling me my bone marrow biopsy was inconclusive because of poor quality. That was how I found out. A careless, offhand, well, duh sort of comment. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. The rush of emotions I felt was unlike anything I've felt before or since. I was staying at my ex-girlfriend's place one night a few years back. I'll try to keep this short. It was in an apartment complex and we were lying in front of the TV when all of a sudden these blood-curdling screams came from the floor above us. Not only screams but glass breaking. I ran upstairs to see what was going on and saw a guy with a gun breaking down her front door. When he saw me, he pointed the gun at me, so I ducked back into the stairwell and ran back to the apartment to call the cops. I locked our door just in case. As we were waiting for the cops to show up, the screams were coming from outside. Downstairs this time. I ran to the balcony. We were on the 2nd floor, and I saw a woman running with a guy giving chase. I ran downstairs to help. I guess there was more fight than flight, and as I came around the corner, he shot her twice right in front of me and turned the gun on himself. He died right there on the sidewalk. Unfortunately, she survived that terrible freaking ordeal. I still think about it every week. Had my keys stolen, which started a mini riot at the max security juvenile detention center I worked at. You're that movie security guard. My mom called me as her suicide note. I live 16 hours away and had to talk to her after she took 2 months worth of strong painkillers and prescription sleep aids. She had driven her car to an abandoned parking lot and had no idea where she was. She couldn't answer any of my questions about how much she took, how long ago she arrived there, but I kept talking to her until suddenly there was just silence on the other end of the phone. I thought she died. Right there on the phone with me. I thought my mother had died. Luckily my husband called my grandpa who lives near her, and because they share the same wireless plan, a customer service agent walked him through pinging her phone and getting her location. My sister rushed there, just beating the ambulance, and they were able to save my mother's life. She was in a coma for about a week and is only now getting her life back together. She's had to make big changes to her life that unfortunately she's not financially able to do, but she's trying hard and I'm proud of her. But my god, that moment on the phone when I was screaming for my mother and there was no response still haunts me and my husband. He says I fell to the floor wailing and he had to take me to the couch, but all I remember is the terrible heartache. I was working on a container ship going from West Coast US to Japan. We got stuck in between two low pressure systems for 3 days. I experienced Seas 4060 featuring. Never in my life have ever felt so small. When Mother Nature reminds you that you're her bee. My best friend, he was my cousin, may as well have been my brother, got hit by a bus in London whilst listening to music on his iPod a couple of years ago and the bus driver essentially crushed him to death under the front left wheel by lowering the passenger platform instead of raising it. I was at work and I got a call to get to London ASAP and to see half of his skull caved in and subsequently watch him die was the most intense and harrowing experience of my life. I watched my mother die from the big C years before that, but this was different level. Frick, I miss you, Dave. His username was @Gravy727. Always makes me cry reading through his comments. On Saturday I was rafting in grade 5 rapids in New Zealand. We flipped and I got thrown into a recirculation hole. I was being forced underwater with the power of a river with nowhere to get out. I tumbled around like a washing machine for about 30 seconds. Seemed like a lifetime. Eventually and luckily a thrust of water popped me out of the hole and into the next rapid. I got into calmer water with everyone already safe on the bank watching on in terror hoping I was alright. My paddle snapped. I swallowed some water, but overall I lived. Going rafting in New Zealand in 2 days. Super glad I stumbled across this, lol. Discovering that my quiet and chilled out 6-day-old baby girl was actually dying and needed emergency open heart surgery. Her condition had not been picked up and we were blissfully unaware. I'll always be so grateful to the health visitor who came to see us on day 6 and expressed her concerns. Even then, we were expecting a wasted trip to the hospital. Ended up in the front of an ambulance stopping traffic. She's 2 now and full of beans. You should think about feeding her something else. So I'm a type 1 diabetic. About 6 months ago, I forgot to test my blood sugar levels before going to bed. I woke up 6 hours later, keenly aware something was wrong, but I wasn't quite sure what was wrong. I jumped out of bed and stumbled, literally stumbling, to the kitchen, and desperately tried to eat something. By the time I had reached the kitchen, my blood sugar was so low that my consciousness began to recede, and I could feel it fading. I remember trying to make french fries because the pantry was empty, but in my barely conscious state I put them in the toaster instead of the oven. My last memory before I lost consciousness is being frustrated upon remembering fries do not go in the toaster, and trying to pull them out. Thank God it was unplugged. Luckily I still lived with my parents, who woke up while I was unconscious and found me try to get ice cream to eat, but being unable to get it or form a sentence. Thankfully, they got my blood sugar up and sat me down on the couch, and regained consciousness. I still remember the loss of control though, and it is intensely terrifying, even as a memory. Called to a reported house fire. Neighbor states they hear screaming and saw smoke flames. This is farm country at 3 AM. Captain and I hop barbed wire fences as we frantically race to this farmhouse to see what happened. Yep, goats. The farmer simply approached us and said, "Howdy boys." Problem: when asked about the screaming and fire, he said he had a brush pile burning and that my goats needed a milking. Learned how closely goats and people sounded the same. Captain shook his head as we talked back to the engine and said to never mention this back at the station. Or maybe he was a serial killer who burned his victims alive and uses the goat farm as a front. Finding my dad dead when I was only 19. He was divorced and I was his only child, and that was the last day I had as a child before I had to grow up and face the harsh reality. Having a knife held to my throat by an incredibly drunk friend who got mad at me about a game of kill, marry, frick around a campfire. I was wasted and he was wasted, and obviously kind of insane, and for some reason my reaction was to yell, "What? You're gonna kill me? Do it. Do it. You won't do it. I freaking dare you," at the top of my lungs. At the time I thought it was fine and the rational way to get him to back down, but later my friends told me they thought there was at least a 50% chance this guy was gonna slit my throat. and a 10% chance he was going to marry you. Staring into the eyes of a stranger to whom I was giving CPR, resuscitation, and watching him die, I think a part of me went to, I hope I can grow that back by living a worthy life. 1992, April. He was 63, I was 25, it still hurts. You've been visited by the good sleep oinker. You will be blessed with cozy, restful sleeps, but only if you comment sleep tight porker. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.